never was the need for nonviolent, peaceful, spontaneous demonstration so urgent as now. Never has the need for public debate been more pressing than at this time. At this juncture in history, war and peace are the most important issues men anywhere can reason about. To the encouragement of this dialogue, to sustaining the citizen in his constitutional right to demonstrate spontaneously and peacefully, today's walk is dedicated. Thank you.
Gentlemen, you've managed to muster how much support in this march today against the move to pull out of Vietnam?
Well, actually, we ran about a dozen or so around here, but we did not plan anything or organize anything at all. Every one of us here came as an individual spontaneously and not as a result of organization.
You're all local people?
Yes,
Bellingham
we are all local people.
Your name is Otto Lincoln?
Lincoln.
Right.
Correct.
And aren't you a former Hungarian freedom fighter, Mr.
Yes.
Lincoln?
Yes, I am. I came from Hungary, and so I lived under communist rule and communist tyranny. I know exactly from inside and out the communist works and how the communists are infiltrating.
What do you feel about this plea for negotiation in Vietnam?
That's entirely out of the question as negotiation concerned. No right-minded people can press for negotiation with murderers and gangsters, which the communists are.
Well, now, what do you feel about this much community support being mustered in favor of their cause?
Well,
does this reflect some attitude in the community?
I don't think so. The answer for that, I think there are much more people who feel exactly as I or the few who are standing around me here in Bellingham, but they simply just chose to ignore these action taken of these, I think, gullible and brainwashed people who support something they don't know what it is. But if those people, all in Bellingham, who would chose to come here, who opposed such kind of demonstration, which is not at all the American way, and I do not believe in such things either in a peaceful country, in a land of freedom, but if they are provoked, at least a few people should take a stand and show to the public that there are some who are willing to do anything for the cause of freedom, even if it's the price of peace.
You don't object to their right to hold this demonstration?
No, I do not object the right to hold this demonstration at all, but it's somewhat out of their taste the good taste, and it is not supporting the American ideas. It is not supporting Christian ideas. It is not supporting anything but the murderous communist cause for total takeover on the globe.
Would you say that we'd be giving Vietnam away if we did negotiate or pull our troops out?
Definitely, I feel that the only solution to Vietnam is go in for Vim. There is nothing else communists understand but the pure power and courage. We have the power, all we need, just a little bit of courage, like the ancestor of the great American people had.
Thanks very much, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
We are aware of the same things happening in Vietnam that the French people knew about in Algeria. It is perhaps rather peculiar that the mass media have published photographs of the most agonizing and revolting sort. We have seen them in mass circulation magazines like Life. Prisoners subjected to torture, often in the presence of American soldiers. One has seen, I presume everyone here has images in his mind, as I do. You see a young man, 21 years of age, already the father of a family, and he is tied to a post and he has a few seconds to do. To me, it makes no difference at all, frankly, whether he is a member of the Viet Cong or a member of the South Vietnamese Army. I only see a young human being who has his life to live. He is helpless in the hands of his captors. The look of terror in his eyes. One more life has been lost, I think probably in vain. One has seen others with scorched faces, bodies of children in their arms, dead or badly mutilated. And curiously enough, there has been no attempt on the part of the government to suppress these pictures. Everyone must be aware of. Yet, there has been no great outburst of moral indignation, such as there was in France. This I find very peculiar. Are we as a nation so completely brutalized by what we see on television every night, by the movies? Are we so used as a daily diet to seeing torture and murder and the most callous disrespect for human life that when it really happens, we are totally indifferent to it? It would seem that that is partly true, and as I say, I am happy that you are here this afternoon. That at least shows that some people, and I hope many others in other parts of the country, do care about what is happening. All this is by way of introduction. I haven't even approached my subject yet. I would like to forestall one criticism of what I've just said, which I'm sure will be made. People will say that if you talk in terms of the agony of the people of Vietnam, you are being sentimental. This is a very, very old criticism on the part of so-called realists. They will say that we must not be defected from our aims in principle because a few people have to suffer on that account. Now, personally, I would reply, if this criticism were made, and say that so far from being sentimental, to take into account the daily lives, the future happiness of millions of people is itself the most fundamental thing which is involved. To argue matters like this, or to resort to war, in terms of abstractions, like freedom and democracy, to argue in terms of global warfare between Moscow or Peking on the one hand and Washington on the other, without any regard for the fortunes, the happiness, the lives of the people who are the helpless victims of the conflict. I think this is not only immoral, but it is really bad politics also. The title which I chose at the last minute was what few things I have to say is Vietnam and World Peace. I think the first thing one should do is to remind ourselves very briefly of how this incredible situation developed. Basically, what is happening in South Vietnam, I think, is the result of that anti-colonial revolution which swept through the world after the Second World War. It took place everywhere in Asia and is now taking place in Africa. As one small episode in that anti-colonial revolution, the French were compelled to give up their colony of Indochina. But not until nearly 10 years had elapsed of bitter fighting in which the French were finally defeated. The French had a professional army. They had complete control of the air and the sea, just as we do today. They were fighting a handful of ragged guerrillas, the Viet Minh, who nevertheless represented the force of nationalism and who were therefore supported by the enormous majority of the people of Vietnam. Not all the military, naval, and air power of the French could save their forces from defeat, because they were fighting under difficult conditions, as we are at the moment, of jungle warfare, in which a handful of determined individuals, supported by the mass of the nation, prevailed. There was a point when the French appealed to President Eisenhower to help them out by massive American intervention. Incidentally, I believe we ourselves gave the French, in equipment and supplies, more than $2 billion of material, which was all totally wasted. And in a last desperate effort to save their collapsing colonial empire, at the time of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the French appealed for nuclear bombing. And there were advocates, and they have been identified. Admiral Radford, for one, wanted to use American nuclear power against the Viet Cong, the Viet Minh, as they were at that time, to end the war in favor of the French. Fortunately, President Eisenhower resisted these proposals. I can't help but think that Mr. Eisenhower was a total failure as a politician in many ways, but he was also, I believe, sincerely a man of peace. And he in a way was in the position of de Gaulle in France, that as a former military man, he was best able to resist the insatiable demands of the military for further acts of aggression. That turning point was passed, nuclear weapons were not introduced, and France evacuated the country. We all thought at that moment that the war was over. It seems absolutely fantastic that when the war had ended, 10 years later, the United States herself should have gotten into precisely the same condition as the French. This agonizing dilemma, which the French faced 10 years ago, and which they solved by getting out under more Descartes, the man whom I admire, this is identically the dilemma that we face today. People often ask whether human beings learn anything from history, and indeed I think they rarely do. But if there was a clear-cut lesson of something we should avoid, this was it. We are now in the same position. To be precise, the government of South Vietnam, which we are trying to support, has lost the confidence of its people, as the French did before. I think everyone who is here has read the things that Senator Morse has said in the Senate, and that respectable journalist like James Reston and Walter Lippmann has repeated. It seems clear that the government of Saigon controls not more than 30% of the people as a whole, in spite of the fact that it has an overwhelming army, 500,000 men under arms or more, a secret police of tens of thousands, control of the sea, control of the air, and support to the tune of $2 million every day from the United States. Most of us fail to realize that the sentiment of nationalism is probably the strongest of all. That combined with anti-colonialism, which is the negative aspect of Asian nationalism. And so we are there in effect to thwart the wishes of the Vietnamese people without admitting candidly what our purpose is. Now this state of affairs dragged on. Our recognition of dictator after dictator, the repetition from the State Department of these threadbare excuses about why we were there in the first place. Things like this occurred. It occurs to me on the spur of the moment. I remember seeing Senator Fulbright, who is certainly one of the more liberal and intelligent people in public life, and he was asked on a television interview what he thought about the present status of the then government in Saigon, and he said that he thought they were doing reasonably well. The very next day after he spoke, that government was overthrown by a military coup of whose existence he and General Taylor were unaware. These statements have been made. I noticed Senator Dodd made a statement the day before yesterday, saying that at last he thought the corner had been turned. At last things were going to take a better shape than they had done in the past. Do you not realize that these same statements and these same promises, illusions, have been made repeatedly, and every single one of them is saying, why should we not believe General Taylor and Senator Dodd any more than we believe their predecessors in the past who were repeatedly proved wrong? Now this situation, which I have indicated, was so until February. And on the 7th, by the way, I meant to remark that during the late presidential election of last year, what should have been a magnificent opportunity to debate the United States course of action in Vietnam was missed. There was no discussion of Vietnam. Senator Goldwater now and then made a remark of such a degree of irresponsibility, followed usually by complete confusion when he half or wholly repudiated what he just said before, that no one knew what was to be expected from this quarter. And Mr. Johnson, for the most part, was silent because he was not pressed. This magnificent opportunity to debate seriously with the best knowledge that was available what should be done was totally lost. It was not lost upon European people. The English and the French noticed this farcical election. I'm certainly not blaming Mr. Johnson himself for that. I think the fault was that of the Republican Party, which put up a candidate of the far right who had no claim to anyone's respect and who has been thoroughly repudiated. At any rate, this opportunity was lost. But Mr. Johnson was not pressed to declare what his policy should be. I was one of those who voted for Mr. Johnson, partly because I believed that in the sphere of domestic policy, where the Negro was concerned, and where a number of other important things like federal aid to education and so on, he was by far the better candidate. But I was always uneasy about Vietnam. He said nothing about his intentions, and the electorate virtually gave him a blank check, fill in as he would.